management, professional development, education, and networking. In 2021, we are having new enhanced benefits in different areas, which include networking, learning, and knowledge sharing, career growth, and especially the different kind of events. Our sponsors comprise of National Archives, Ministry of Presidential Affairs, UAE, and Dubai Health Authorities. Our partners are IIL Middle East. For more information, please follow us on different social media platforms and our web link www.pmiuae.org. One strategic PDU will be claimed automatically to those who attend the webinar today. Also, please note PDUs will not be awarded for those who leave the screen online and work on something else. So your interaction with the speaker is crucial in order to claim the PDU. So I would like to introduce Ms. Annmarie, our speaker today. Annmarie has 20 years of experience managing global teams and complex projects across financial, healthcare, higher education, and IT consulting services sectors. She has a track record on focusing on high-risk areas of a project or program, realigning projects that need rescuing, and delivering improved processes and technical solutions that result in tangible business value. She is passionate about helping clients develop a culture of delivering the right results for their organization by aligning strategy with execution and building strong collaborative teams to ensure that the initiative will succeed. She has worked in a lot of organizations as a project manager or a strategic consultant. Some of them are Wellesley College, Vassar College, Vermont Care Partners, Champlain College, Judiciary, Vermont Judiciary, and the University of Vermont. Annmarie has a BSc in Applied Computing from University of Ulster, Ireland. She holds a Project Management Professional PMP credential from PMI and SAFe Scrum Master SSM credential and Leading Safe Agilist SA credential from Scale Agile. So now I'll be handing over to Anne for the details for the session, okay? Thank you, Anne.
Thank you for that great introduction, and it's great to be here. I know it's evening time with everybody. It's start of day here, and I've just had my coffee, and I'm raring to go, as they say in Ireland. So I'm going to share my screen with the presentation. So let's see if we can do that. Okay, looks like it should be coming through for everybody. Move this over here. All right, so we're all here today to talk about bridging the gap between strategy and execution. And we want to do this because we really want to make sure that we are working on the right work at the right time and bringing our teams together to accelerate our business results and our outcomes. So today we're going to step through the gap and talk about what the gap is. I'm going to talk you through a business results maturity model that I developed, and then show you a case study that I've implemented with some clients, and then we'll talk about some next steps that you can take for your own organizations. But before we jump in, we're going to use a tool called menti.com today to make this interactive. So hopefully you're all ready, you've got your fingers on the keyboard, and you're ready to participate. So if you go to www.menti.com, you'll see it on the screen here, and enter the code 4566356. You can see the code right up here. And you can do that on any device, or you can do it on a browser on your web. So just take a minute, go there. Okay, some folks have already found it, which is awesome. And then just enter in where you're from, and then you can keep that open as we go along today, because we're going to have several polls and questions that we'll ask throughout the presentation. And when you're on Menti, you can see there's a button for asking questions, and there's a little bubble where you can provide feedback as we go along as well. So you can use those interactive elements on Menti as we're going through the presentation. All right, you can see lots of folks from Dubai here today. Not so many from Vermont, USA, just me. Okay, so that's great. It looks like we're all getting the hang of it. So fantastic. All right, so we've got one more question for you. So we'll let, folks can enter their place that they're from as they go along. And then we'll go to the next question is, why are you here? What is it that you're hoping to get out of today's session, today's discussion? So you should see this question pop up on your menti.com page, and you can just enter in your thoughts on why you're here today. Okay, here we go. Alignment, that's a great answer. Implementation, yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. The knowledge, learn about communication, that's great. Understanding strategy. Okay, this is fantastic. So, meet new people, learning something new, figuring out how to be more productive. Fantastic. So lots of good reasons to be here today. So this, hopefully now everybody's getting used to using this tool, and you can see how easy it is. So we'll be, as we go through the presentation today, we're going to use this quite a bit to collect feedback from you guys and to hear from you and allow you to put your voice in the presentation as well. And so before we jump in, there's two ways to ask questions. So you can see on the WebEx itself, you've got the little question icon down here, so you can ask questions through the WebEx presentation. You can also ask questions through menti.com, and you can click on the buttons and send feedback on the slides as well as we go along. So feel free to use either one of those areas, and we will collect all of the questions that come in, and then at the end we'll stop and we'll try to address as many of those as we can. All right, so lots of great reasons to be here. So let's jump in. Just before we get started, that was a great introduction, but one of the things to know about me is I'm a software engineer. That's my background. I started developing trading systems, and I was thrown into project management at the deep end. I was only a couple of years out of college. I had just moved to New York City from Ireland, and I was working part of a small team to develop a small fixed income trading system. And my manager and her manager decided to leave the investment bank on the same week, basically. They both handed in their notice on the same day. And they decided that I would be a great candidate to take over the team. So I was really thrown in at the deep end, and the people who would have supported me were long gone. They were leaving the organization. So I was managing a team of about 5 people with 3 really critical applications, and it was super stressful, and it was took me a while to get my feet under the table and to figure it all out and figure out how to manage the work and figure out how to lead the team. And it was so challenging that I decided I wanted to be a C++ developer again. So I went back and got myself another job about 18 months later as a C++ developer developing trading systems. And, you can all guess what happened there. I started as a developer, and I found out that the team weren't really working in a very efficient way. So I ended up starting to organize the work and work with the stakeholders and engage the stakeholders and plan out the work. And I, stepped into that team leader and organizational role again. So fast forward another couple of years, and I decide that, this is what I'm really good at. And I committed to taking on a leadership role in another organization. And from there, I haven't really looked back. So everything that I've learned by bootstrapping myself and trying to learn from others around me. And I've learned the hard way. I wear the scars, and I know what not to do. So what you're going to hear about today from me is a very pragmatic way to approach not just managing projects, but leading teams and trying to bring it all together in a way that's effective and works for an organization. Regardless of what you're trying to do, you can apply it in many different ways, either at the team level or at the organizational level. So I'm excited to get in and share this with you and hear your feedback on it. So as we talk about, we're going to talk through the core capabilities that an organization needs to be successful. And we're going to step you through how a case study organization applied this tool to really look at their gaps and identify the opportunities for how they would improve. And you'll be able to do that for yourself, for your own organization as well. And at the end, we're going to give you a copy of this presentation and a worksheet that includes all the questions you can ask to assess this for yourself. And why do we want to take the time to do this? Well, our goals are to really improve how we're collaborating as a team and engagement with our stakeholders. We're trying to reduce churn. We're trying to use the time we have wisely and position ourselves to be able to lead our organization forward to better outcomes. And I want to start by just stepping back and talking about the lay of the land in project management. You know, we've been using formal methods in project management for decades at this point. But yet, if you look at the recent studies, way too many projects fail to be completed, slip past their original dates, and don't meet their goals at all, or end up being delivered late and way over budget. And I see this with my clients all the time. I get called in by clients to help them rescue projects and to figure out what's gone wrong and to try and put projects back on track. I got called into one client that was 6 months into an electronic medical record implementation. They had already sunk $500,000 into the project, and it was supposed to be delivered within the next 3 months, and they were nowhere near ready for adopting the system, and the vendor didn't even have a plan that was realistic. And so it took weeks for us to figure out what the issues were and then produce a plan and then take that organization forward with that plan to ultimately be successful. But the project wasn't realistic from the start, and it had to be replanned in a way that was realistic going forward. And so I see this all the time, unfortunately, and I've made it my mission to try and help people create environments where their teams can be successful so that we can avoid these situations. So I want to ask you guys, this is another chance for you to contribute. What do you think is the #1 challenge facing managers and leaders today? So if you go to menti.com, you should see this question pop up. And just take a minute and tell me what you think is the #1 challenge. Okay, so this is great, right? So this is, I mean, I think all of these are challenges for a lot of organizations, but so we can see from this that competing priorities is definitely the forerunner here. So let's look at a presentation, let's look at the results of a survey. So I recently conducted this survey via LinkedIn, and I collected feedback from project managers and leaders around what their challenges were and what was really holding them back and what the barriers to their success was. And clarity on what is needed was #1. Competing priorities was #1. And then clarity on what was needed, resources and timelines were in the 2nd and 3rd place. The piece of feedback that came back again and again was really how competing priorities and lack of clarity around what the organization needed to achieve and how to achieve it was really hampering teams to be able to go out and do what they needed to do to be successful. So some of the other feedback that these project managers and leaders provided was that ongoing changing visions and reacting to what's coming up in the environment on an ongoing day-to-day basis was really hampering their ability to create a path and move forward on that path. And they just found themselves reacting constantly to shifting priorities. Lots of scope creep, lots of shifting resources. And then the other challenge that we see as well is that in today's world, most project managers don't have a team of resources that are reporting directly to them. They're actually managing resources that report to other functional managers So you've got competing priorities across other teams that you're also trying to deal with. So it's quite challenging to deliver projects when you don't have the resources under your control. So there's definitely a gap between the strategic side and the execution side, between the thinking of the executives and the people on the ground doing the work. So how do we bridge that gap? Well, in Vermont, we have this saying, you can't get there from here. And Vermont is landlocked. It's in the U.S. It's winter here right now, and there's snow outside my window, and I spent last weekend skiing and learning some new I was trying to do some backcountry skate skiing. It wasn't very graceful, but I managed to stay standing. So in Vermont, we have the saying, you can't get there from here, which means you have to take the long way around, and you know that can add 50 miles and an hour to your journey. Now, clearly, this is not Vermont, so I'm going to give you guys a chance to, where do you think this is? Where in the world is this picture from? Let me know. Type it into yourmenti.com. Okay, someone's seen this presentation before? Scotland? No, it's not Scotland. It could be Scotland, though. It can only be Ireland. Yes, it is only Ireland. Okay, sorry, I shouldn't say that before everybody else answers. So, okay, I give it away. Lots of Irelands, yes. So this is, it's called Carrick-a-Reid Rope Bridge. It's in Northern Ireland, and it connects these two islands. So just like we have to connect these two islands with a bridge, we have to connect on strategy and execution with leadership. So when we look at strategy, we want clarity from our strategy. We want to be clear. We want to understand what it is we need to do in order to be successful as an organization. And when we look at the execution side, we want to be able to be effective. We want to be able to do the work in a way that's going to yield results. And we want to do it in the quickest way possible that's going to yield quality results. And then, so we need leadership to bridge these two areas and these two teams, the executive team from the people who are actually doing the work. And leadership results in alignment. So the whole purpose of leadership here, bridging this gap, is to make sure that we're in alignment from our strategy and our execution side. And at the end of the day, it's all about people and relationships. And we as leaders in our organization, whether you're at the executive leader side, or whether you're in a project leader position, or maybe you're just a team member, but we all have a responsibility to build and nurture those relationships that's going to help the team come together and collaborate better. And as leaders in an organization, we have a responsibility to create an environment where our teams can be successful. So we have to look at what's missing. We have to spend time creating that environment so our teams can be successful. And we have to also be able to cut through the noise and the chaos and create organized methods of doing the work, so that's really going to yield the results from for the organization. So let's jump in and look at what it takes to do this. So this is the business results maturity model that I developed. Just to give some background, I was asked by a PMO team to come in and help them look at how they were performing within their organization and identify what they could do to be more effective. And so as we stood back at it, I looked at a number of different models. I looked at models from Gartner, from OPM, from like lots of different models that were out there in the marketplace. And I found that models were either very focused on the strategic side and looking at the overall strategy, or very focused on the execution side, but there wasn't something that brought it all together. So I threw away the models and I started from scratch and said, what do I need if I'm creating an environment where people are successful? What needs to be the pillars in that environment? What do people need to be successful? And so we come up with these core capabilities across these three areas. So in the strategy and planning side, in the strategy side, we have a number of elements on the leadership bucket and a number in the execution side. And so we took this maturity model and we used it to ask questions around how the organization was working, and we'll share some of those results later in the presentation. So on the strategy and planning side, we're looking at overall strategy. Firstly, is there a strategy, and does everyone in the organization know what that strategy is? We need the organization to have a clear goal and a clear mission. So that's the number one. And then the strategy is the approach that you use to achieve that goal or mission. So there needs to be an overarching strategy from the executive side around what the goals are, what the mission of the organization is, and then what you're going to do to be able to achieve that at a very high level. And then we need to be able to link that directly to the work that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And what I see in the organizations that I work with very often is that there's a very big high-level goal and mission statement. There's some very high-level strategies around how to achieve that. And then there's a lot of work getting done and a lot of people working on a day-to-day basis, and they don't know how their work directly relates to the strategy. And there's even at the strategy side, there's way too many priorities in an organization, and there's too many things going on at one time, and the resources are then conflicted across competing priorities. So that's one area to look at. We also want to look at budget. So we have a tendency within organizations to ignore the cost of the resources that are doing the work when they're internal employees. And we don't often measure the amount of time it takes to do some of the work and how much we're investing in that work as an organization. And it's really important to look at it from that perspective, because you want to know that the areas that you're investing your people's time in is the area that's going to yield you the most results. So that's one area that you want to look at from a budget perspective. You also, in projects, we tend to create these very high-level budgetary estimates when we're doing a project proposal. And then when we get into the project and we know what we're doing and we have a better sense of what needs to be accomplished and the vendors that we're going to work with, etc., we often then have a new budget. But we don't align those two budgets, and we don't often go back and manage tightly to that budget. And scope comes in and scope creep happens, but the budget doesn't necessarily get adjusted. And we end up trying to get our same people, our same resources to do more work in the same amount of time. And so that doesn't work very well either. So budget's a really important element in the overall strategy side. So from a governance perspective here, we want to make sure that we have an ongoing oversight into the work that's being executed as the teams are executing the work, and that they've got the support of the executive team, and that the executive team is aware of what's going on within the organization, and they can help with the decision making. They can help make the right decisions, say no to things, because they have a better appreciation of the work the team is doing. So right now in organizations, I see a lot of executive teams that are sort of firing off new things, and they're running after bright, shiny objects, and they're reacting to things that's happening in the marketplace, and they're not actually stepping back and looking at, well, how does this impact the work that we've got going on right now? What does that look like for the team? So we want to make sure that we are having those conversations as leaders, and that the executive team are fully informed on what work is actually being executed and how we're doing that. And then from a decision-making perspective, we really want to drive the decisions down to the people who understand the work and are doing the functional work, but there's a set of policy-level decisions and priority-level decisions that should be made at a higher level. So especially, for instance, if you've got a number of different teams that are working on different priorities, there needs to be some decision around what is the number one priority that everybody should be pulling towards. So there's a decision-making capability that we want to drive into the organization, but there's also decisions that executives need to make around overall policies and priorities, etc. So ultimately, we need to be engaging the executive teams and the teams doing the work and bringing them together to have these conversations as we're executing the work. So let me know, how aligned is your strategy and execution? So when you look at what we've just talked about, do you feel like you're very well aligned, or some projects are aligned, or you're not aligned at all? Yeah. So this is sort of reflecting what I see within organizations, right? So, very few organizations have this down all the way. Many organizations are prioritizing and aligning top initiatives. And the question I would ask there is, are those initiatives covering 80% of the work that the teams are doing on the ground, or are those initiatives that are clearly aligned more of the 20% of the work? And is 80% of the work not aligned at all? And are people just very busy doing work that doesn't actually align into the top priority that's going to yield the most results for the organization? So this is great to see. This is sort of reflective of what I see from my world here in Vermont. So let's look at leadership. So on the leadership side, there's a number of core capabilities that we want to build in. So the first is the overall organizational approach to building leadership and influence capabilities. So does the organization have a culture of building and sustaining high-performing teams? Do they focus on training leaders? Do they focus on mentoring leaders? Is there a very robust leadership capacity within the organization? What I see in many organizations is that leaders people get promoted, right? Just like I was a software developer. I got thrown into a project leadership position with no training, no support, no mentoring. I see that all the time within organizations. So someone who's good at the technical side or someone who's good at a business function gets suddenly elevated into a leadership position because if you're doing well over here, well, then you should do well over here. And it doesn't always translate. So we're not really supporting our people to be successful in these roles that we put them in. So that's something that we really want to address. So as part of that, we want to look at the people themselves and the competencies. So have we laid out what it takes to be successful in any of these roles that we're putting our people in? Do they have clarity on what the expectation is of them right now? And do they have clarity on how they can grow? So what are the things they can do to enhance their own leadership capability and grow into a greater role with greater impact within the organization? And in many organizations, especially the medium-sized, small to medium-sized organizations, I don't see that they're doing this very well. They're not spending enough time focusing here. And so then I look at project leadership. So I coined this term project leader versus project manager. Project manager is sort of how the entire industry looks at it, but I feel like it really should be called a project leader because you're not just managing the work, you're actually leading a team and you're leading stakeholders and you're trying to drive engagement. And so that's a different skill set. It requires skills, managerial and organizational skills, but it also requires leadership skills. So when I look at teams and I look at how they're performing, I want to look at project managers and see, are they really acting as a project leader? Are they able to bring a team together? Are they able to move a team forward, create that momentum, engage the stakeholders, drive accountability at the team level, at the stakeholder level, at the sponsor level, and keep everybody motivated, moving down the same path together? And then finally, on this rubric, we've got organizational change management. And I feel like this is so important in our projects because most of our projects, we are working on something that is going to result in some change within our organizations. And if our projects aren't going to result in change, then we shouldn't probably be doing them in the first place, right? I would question the value of those projects. If we're just going to have status quo to status quo, why are we doing all this work? So we tend to think of organizational change management as this set of methodologies over here, and project management is something here. And there's different people that run the organizational change management, and it's a different skill set. But I disagree with that. I feel like organizational change management activities needs to be blended with the project management methodology because you need to be creating a vision around that change and managing and guiding the team towards that change as you're executing the work of the project. So when I look at the overall methodology for projects, I want to bring in the activities that are really important to identify what the change means for people and to think about how are we going to move the team through what they need to move through to get to the outcome and be able to adopt the new system or the new process or whatever we're delivering for them. And the other aspect of organizational change that I want to bring up here is often we do not have dedicated project teams. So we're bringing together people from throughout the organization on different functional teams, and we're bringing them together as a collaborative group, and this group's going to go forward and execute the project together. And many times people have other day jobs that they're also working on while they're working on project work. So there's change management associated with bringing that team together and having that team meld and gel together and then work really well together. And so we have to think about how we are guiding and helping the team navigate through the change of becoming a team. And that's something as a project leader is very important for us to be able to pay attention to as well. And so I look at something like, I call it a team charter. So when I'm bringing a team together for a project, yes, we have that project charter that we all know and love, but I also look at a team charter. How do we bring the team together? How do we talk about values? How do we talk about guiding principles of how we're going to operate as a team? And some of these things sound like they might take a long time to do, but honestly, you can get, 20 to 30 people in a room and go through and create values and guiding principles in 90 minutes. And you can do it in a way that brings the team together. And now they have this shared vision that they can go forward and execute together. So this doesn't have to be something so big that it's unmanageable. You can do these activities in your day-to-day work as project leaders. Okay, so with that said, let me know, what areas do you think you need to develop for your team and organization? Okay, lots of communication, yep. Ownership is important, clear vision, yep. Yeah, cooperation across teams is huge. Self-motivation. I think that driving accountability is one of those other things that I hear about all the time from project leaders. It's hard to drive accountability, and you need people to take accountability in order to create that momentum, and that can be really challenging when you have a diverse team who aren't reporting to you. So that requires building really strong relationships with the functional managers. So your team members report to functional managers. They're often, your team is talking to them and you've got the project team together, but you really need to develop very strong relationships with those functional managers to make that work. Okay, this is great feedback. All right, so let's talk about the execution side. So in all the rubrics I looked at, they looked at execution and they just called it methodology. So do you have a process in place? And I see that again and again. People think, oh, we have a process, therefore we're good. What I see is that many organizations have a process, and the reality is that their teams are not following that process. Or the process has been developed in a way that isn't helping the team, isn't helping support the team, and it feels like it's red tape. It feels like it's process for the sake of process. And I'm really anti-process for the sake of process. I'm a very pragmatic person. If the process isn't helping us, why are we doing it? So as part of this model, I want us to go back and look at the process. If you have a process, go back and look at that process and think about how team-centric that process is. How does that process work for the team? How does it feel to the team and to the stakeholders to be engaged as part of that process? Do they feel like this is, projects is something that's being done to them, or do they feel like they're part of the team helping to solve challenges and move it forward together? And there's a very different nuance to that. So think about your process and think about whether that process is truly team-centric and is truly helping the team move forward. And how does it feel to the team? And if you don't have a process, then you absolutely should have a process, right? There should be some process there that helps you be more effective about how you're doing the work and how you're executing the work, because having some standard processes and standard templates in place will help you avoid this churn of of mundane work that tends to suck people dry with busyness, right? They're busy, 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 but they're not actually really achieving the stuff that their brain power could achieve. So you want to try to eliminate as much of the mundane checklist type stuff as possible and really create an environment where the team are able to spend their time focusing on the areas where they add the most value and will yield the most results. But you do need some process in place to do that. So I also stripped away project execution from the process. So many other rubrics tie this together. But again, if you might have a process, but you might not be executing to that process. So here, I really want to look at how is the team executing, what things are going well, what feels really hard, what isn't working at all. So are all of the teams following a standard way of executing projects? Are they all working at the same level of quality? Are they able to come together and learn from what they're doing? And is there an iterative improvement cycle in place? So we look at all of those things as part of how we're executing. From a performance management perspective, here we're looking at how the project is truly performing, not just the status of the project. So this is a nuance, but the project status is, well, is the project going well? Someone can stop you in the corridor and say, hey, how's your project doing? What's the status? You go, oh, it's good and we're green. Okay, that doesn't really tell them anything, right? Performance is, well, the project's going well, we are in testing, and, we've gotten through 75% of the test cases, and we're on target to finish by the end of next week. So we're really looking at a more detailed performance metric that gives more information versus just a status metric that says, yeah, we're doing well, we're on track, which really doesn't tell you everything. So again, it's a nuance. You have to get into the details, but there's a nuance there to that. So from a resource management perspective, this one's standard, right? Everybody knows that you need to be able to look at your resources and manage your resources. But often what we don't have is a clear picture of all the work that our resources are working on at any given time. So back to that, the question I just asked you previously around where are you aligned? You said some of your projects are aligned and some of your projects clearly what you're doing from a resource perspective. But the teams are executing a lot of other work in addition to project work, and many executive teams don't have a full vision on what that work looks like. So it's really important to dive in and really understand all of the work that's going on across the organization and make sure that people are working on the right work at the right time. And then finally, execution wouldn't be execution without looking at the tools and the repositories that we're using. And again, very like process, the processes, the tools, and the templates that we're using around our project plans tend to be very project management focused and not very team centric. So for instance, if you've got a 1,000-line MPP file and that's your project plan, the chances are that the majority of your team are not cranking open that plan on a daily basis to find out what they should be working on. Right? Most of them can't read the plan. It doesn't make sense to them. It's high level here, it's detailed here, and it just doesn't come together in a way that's really helping inform them around what they need to do and how they need to do it. So when you're looking at tools, we want to, again, take that team-centric approach and help the team be able to get to the information they need to get to, find the information, track the information, know what's expected of them without having to go through the project manager. They should be able to self-serve. They should be able to work independently. So when you look at your tools, have a look at your tools from that perspective. All right, so I know this is a lot of information and we're going through it pretty quickly, but let's have you guys answer now. Where do you think you need to focus from an execution perspective? Okay, so it looks like it's a mixed bag right across the board, so most on the process side. And the resources, yeah. So I think, when you look at this, definitely you want to start with the process and make sure that your process is effective and get your team's input to that as well, and the full team's input, not just the core team, the stakeholders as well? How does the process feel for everybody across the board? Okay, that's great feedback. All right, so let's jump in and take a quick look at a case study that I've done recently. This was with the PMO team of a local organization, and they really wanted to look at how could they execute their projects more effectively, how could they be more effective as a PMO team, and what could they do to just elevate how they're showing up within the organization. So this is what the engagement looked like. We started with a discovery phase like you would in many projects. We scoped out what we were trying to achieve and who would need to be involved. One of the things for this organization, and I think very similar to many organizations, is that the PMO team were only responsible for a subset of the projects. They were only leading a core number of those big initiatives. And there was like 40 other project managers throughout the organization that were running smaller projects, itty-bitty projects, functional projects, etc. So a lot of the project work was being done in the organization by people who had no background in project management. And so we put together a survey, and we put the same questions out to the executive team, to anyone who was, we called it managing the work, because some people didn't even know that it would classify as a project. So anyone who's managing any set of work that involves multiple people, that's sort of a project, and then the people who were on the team, who were the individual contributors. So we got feedback from all of these three sources. We then took all of that feedback and we analyzed it, and we ran it through the business results maturity rubric that I'll show you in a second. And then we come up with some recommendations and a roadmap for improvement. And then we reported out and we got the executive buy-in to help the team start to move forward with improving how they were showing up and improving how they were doing the work right across the board. And this assessment, in this case, took about 8 weeks. You could do it in a shorter period, but I think this was 8 to 10 weeks overall, which, you really need to give time to get through this. So I think probably 8 weeks. You could do it in 6 weeks for a smaller organization. So this was one of the sample questions that we asked, was what challenges affect you or your team's ability to deliver on your work? And you can see here how the executive team answered and how the project leaders answered. So it was good to see that they were in alignment around where the core challenges were. So prioritizing the work was one of the top challenges. The securing resources was their number one. And you can see some of the other items that you guys mentioned here, communicating clarity around what the work is, and then just establishing clear outcomes around what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. So the good news here was that while there were challenges, the executive team's view of those challenges was fairly well in alignment with the project team's view of those. And as we get into more detailed questions, there was definitely a disparity between what the executive team thought and the project team thought, and we got a lot of other information out of it. But we then took all of this information and helped, we used that to help drive the model for improvement. So we took all of the feedback, and then we went through this business results maturity model. So this is a very detailed model, so it's got a line item for each of the core capabilities that we just walked through earlier. And then it's got these 6 levels of maturity. So level 1 is it's non-existent, it's not really documented, or we're not really applying it consistently. Sorry, that's level 0. Level 1 is there's a consistent process there, and we're using it on some projects but not other projects. And then we go up from there until level 5. Level 5 is like we apply this consistently. We have a very consistent way of doing the work, and we know that we're applying it consistently throughout the organization. And as we're going through each one of these core capabilities, one of the things to note is that we recognize we don't necessarily want to be at a level 5 or need to be at a level 5 right now. That's not the goal for the organization, and it might not be a goal for your organization. And each core capabilities might need to be at a different level. So we took a first pass through the maturity model and we colored green for where do we think we should be as an organization right now as we look to the next 12 to 24 months, where do we think we should be? And we marked that in green. And then we went through and we took all of the feedback and we went through each one of the core capabilities and we said, okay, where do we think we are based on all of the feedback that we've heard from the organization? And that's the key piece. It's not just based on our perspective sitting in our bubble as a small PMO team. It was based on all of this 360 feedback that we got from the organization. And we marked that in yellow, and you can see that here. And then we went through it again and we said, okay, where's the gaps and where's the opportunities? And we took a pass through that and then we prioritized those and said, what do we need to fix first? Where do we want to spend our attention? And from there, we developed our roadmap for moving forward. And in the roadmap, we focused it on sprints. And in this organization's perspective, we created sprints that were 8 weeks long, which I know is a long sprint for many organizations. But we wanted to give them enough time to focus on core capabilities in each one of the sprints, and they were doing this while they were still doing all of their project work. So, you know, we know that we're all busy in our organizations. You cannot put your project work on hold to be able to do development work or process improvement work. So you have to find a way to blend those two together. So in our first sprint here, establishing the PMO foundation, that was all about the methodology and really tightening up the methodology, throwing away what wasn't working, dialing in what was working, and being able to be really good at getting to plans and helping to guide and engage the team and the stakeholders and move them forward. So as we were reviewing the methodology and coming up with new templates and changing those templates, we baked that into the active projects that were running, so we were able to be really nimble in how that was rolled out across the organization. So Sprint 2 is then piloting with a couple of core projects and then starting to extend out through other people in the organization. And then we bake this review and improve cycle in as we go along. And then ultimately, you know, you're going to move forward and then do the assessment again. So at the end of this 12 months, essentially, I would expect this organization to redo the survey, redo the assessment and say, okay, what do we need to do now? What's the next step? And keep doing that and doing that. And continuous improvement is something that never ends, right? You're always going to change the environment that you're working in, and the challenges that you're working to is ongoing. So you're never really done here. So you have to find a way to bake in continuous improvement into everything that you're doing with your teams as you're moving forward. And this was some feedback that this PMO director provided that I thought was helpful to share, some lessons learned. So she felt like the exercise itself and being able to look at this from a business and a strategic and a leadership perspective really helped the team get behind the changes that they needed to make and how they were showing up and how they were working. Dividing the action plan into sprints made it more manageable. And then this insight is really interesting. She said, although the PMO team themselves probably could have moved pretty quickly to implement some of this stuff, they recognized the value of the team engagement, and they slowed down and integrated this into the work they were doing as they engaged their teams, because they really wanted the teams to be engaged and bought into how they were doing the work and get their skin in the game, essentially. So they integrated those changes into their active projects and moved more slowly, but I think ultimately they will be more successful because they were able to do that. And then their goal is to really use this assessment as a catalyst to accelerate their results. So, you know, reviewing and refining their methodology was the first piece. They then also had some training for internal teams. We did some just-in-time project leadership training, just-in-time requirements gathering, requirements validation, other training around how to really develop quality products. We looked at what the team needed. We had some coaching in place, some leadership coaching in place for the team as they were executing. And then one of the big items that we did right out of the gate was to establish that project portfolio view so that they could see everything that the teams were working on. And now they had something that they could share with their executive team. So the executive team could start to appreciate the amount of work that was underway in the organization and how the competing priorities was affecting them, and then start to make better decisions around those competing priorities. And this is a sample of what that dashboard looks like. So this is a view that many organizations don't have, and the executives are relying on trust, and they're relying that the teams are doing the right work, and they're assuming that that's, the trust is an element of a good leader, right? I trust that my teams are working on the right stuff, but that sort of removes some of the accountability from the executive team, and they really need to be accountable for some of the decisions that they're making as well. So we need to be able to show them the reality of our world as project leaders and as teams, and be able to bring everybody together to make effective decisions around what work gets done and when, making sure we're doing the right work at the right time for the right results for the organization. So now this is your turn to take some action. So, I would ask you, what challenges are holding your teams back? What's your number one impediment to success? And what does your team need in order to be able to succeed? And how is your situation impacting both your team and the organization? And what are you going to do about it? So how can you create an environment for success for your team? So let's take a minute and go to menti.com and let's answer this and see what folks are going to do. Trust and team building, yes, that's a really good one. Trust. Yeah, I love empowering people for sure. Co-location helps. I mean, in this environment, I think we have to try to create an environment of co-location, even though we're all in very disparate locations. Here in the US, many of us are still working remotely. So you have to try to build, you have to be very intentional about creating relationships while you're outside of an office situation. So this is great, right? So you guys are really diving into the leadership, the engagement, the team building, the trust, which really is foundational, right? You cannot have a high-performing team if that trust is not there. So this is really good. Okay, so let's keep moving forward because I want to get to some questions. So here is my call to action for you. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, I don't know if you guys are Mission Impossible fans, but here you go. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to assess how your organization and your team works, prioritize opportunities for improvement, establish an environment where your team can succeed, thereby creating unstoppable momentum, accelerating your results, and delivering the outcomes that your organization needs to achieve its mission. In other words, be the superhero for your organization, and I know you have it in you. So this is an approach that you can take. So it's very similar to the approach that I took in the engagement. So, start off by mobilizing your team, get input from across the organization and your teams into that, assess your results, and then really just start dialing in on some of the areas that you see are areas and gaps and opportunities. And I will share the link shortly, but with this presentation, I've also got a worksheet that goes through all of the core capabilities and the questions you need to ask to do some of this assessment for yourselves. And this is why you're going to do this, right? This is important work. It's going to help you really improve your team engagement, your stakeholder engagement, and just reduce that churn, and then get you to a clear roadmap. And this is the perfect time to do this, right? We're in January, it's a new year, it's a perfect time to really assess what could you achieve this year. And you might not solve all your problems this year, but if you can get started on a path to continuous improvement and improve team engagement and stakeholder engagement, then you're winning right out of the gate. So what other outcomes would you hope to achieve? What would be important for you and your teams? What gaps do you see? What would be important for you to close? Yeah, quality work. I think that's really important, right? So we talk about taking the quickest path to getting something done, but it's got to be the most optimal path that still does quality work. Client satisfaction, yeah, meeting objectives, high performance, high quality. Sustainability, I think, is really important, yeah. So this is great. And I think that somebody wrote a team that buys into the organizational strategy. So that's huge. That's really important, right? Many of our teams don't quite see the value of the work they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And that results in morale issues. It means the team can be quite discouraged. They're showing up, they're working really, really hard, but they're not seeing that it moves the needle for the organization. So that becomes super tiring over time. And so, really just bringing all of this together helps motivate the team, helps keep morale up, and it helps just bring people together, and it really helps move an organization forward. Okay, so this is great. So you've got some options here, so you can jump into the appendix worksheet, do this yourself. I am doing a workshop. I'm starting a workshop in the next few weeks, and I've got a link. I want to invite you all to a free implementation workshop. So now that you've got the basis of what these core capabilities are and the basis of how to go about it, I'm going to run a free implementation workshop on how you take this and really push it forward for your organization. So I've got a link that you can jump into and register for that next week. If the time doesn't work for you, you can register and we'll send you the recording. And then I do work with a couple of clients to help them with this too. So I'm definitely open for that if anybody's interested in that option. And again, I just want to, put sort of that call for you to take the action now, because if you take action now, by March, you could have a really robust plan that you could really move your team forward this year. And so starting with this implementation workshop next week, take it, run with it, and do whatever you do, whatever you're able to implement is going to help move your team forward. So these are the action steps, and I don't know if we can copy these into the chat, but I will send these out to everybody, and I'll try to copy them into the chat when we break for Q&A and allow you to see what these are. Get the copies of the presentation and the links. And we can also email them out. I think we have access to everybody's email, so we can email these out as well so that you've got these in your inbox. So I want to hear from you before we jump into Q&A. How are you going to take action? What are you going to do to take action? Okay, so it's plan, process improvement plan. Awesome. Align the team with strategy. That's a great one. Team awareness, engagement. Okay, this is awesome. Lots of great action. I love doing these presentations, but sometimes I feel like when I walk away, that people aren't necessarily going to take action. So here's what I say to you. Firstly, join the implementation webinar next week if you can, or sign up and watch the recording. But then pencil out time in your calendar to actually go back over this material and think about how you're going to engage your team to do this work with you. Actually go right now and block out some time in your calendar to do that, because that's going to help you take action. The worst thing that you can do is, sort of go home tonight and come back tomorrow morning and have forgotten about this. So if you've got time in your calendar for sometime tomorrow or Thursday, or sorry, tomorrow is your Thursday, Thursday or Friday, then block that time out and go through it again and really take the action, and maybe put time in your calendar on a weekly basis as well. That's really helpful. So I did put the links into the chat. Hopefully everybody's been able to get those and you can jump into them right from the chat. So let's jump in. I think we've got a few minutes that we can do questions. So sorry, let me just find the questions. So I don't see any questions coming in. You can put questions in the Menti website, or do we have any questions in the Q&A? If you've got questions, let's put them into the Q&A either on Menti or on the WebEx, and we'll address them now.
Yeah. I got some questions here, Anne.
Perfect.
So the first one is, does this imply that you need a project manager?
Does it? So someone needs to be managing the work, right? So if someone is managing the work, maybe it's a functional manager or a supervisor or part of the team. So whoever is managing the work can help do this work. And if you're an individual contributor or an individual team member, then I would say, you can also take a look at these core capabilities and think about what you can do to set up an environment where you can be successful. So if you go through the questions and you go through the core capabilities, there's probably areas where you can start to show up differently yourself. Maybe instead of saying yes to shifting priorities, you question them and you ask, how does this line up with the strategy? Is this work more important than this work? You can document the work that you're doing. You can say, hey, this is what's going on in my world. What should I stop doing so that I can be successful over here?
There is one more question here. Why do we always need to reach level 5 in the maturity model?
So in this maturity model, you don't need to reach level 5. So that's one of the important pieces about this maturity model is you get to set the level that is going to work for you. So, and it's set by core capability. By core capability, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So maybe on the strategy side, you feel like, well, you know what, for our team, we can only be a level 3 because we're really focusing in on the team, not the wider organization, and that's okay. So you go through the model and you go through the questions and you set what is most appropriate for you and your team right now. So it's not, you're not thinking 5 years ahead. You're thinking, what's the most appropriate level that we want to be at for, let's say, the next 12 months. That's our target. And 12 to 18 months, I would say, set that as your target. And then you set where you are right now, and then you try to close that gap over that 12 to 18 month period. And then you assess it again, right? And then maybe it's the same, maybe it's changed. But you're working core capability by core capability, not a one-size-fits-all.
Okay, there is one more. Is it essential to set up a PMO in order to achieve the real benefits?
No, and I've done this with teams. I've also done it with an IT team, and I've done it with other teams. So this organization that I used as a case study was an organization that had a very small PMO of like less than 5 people. And so, as I said, most of the project work that was being done in the organization was actually being managed by people outside of the PMO. So, so definitely was not, the PMO was there and they were able to put a consistent process together and guide that, but there does not need to be a PMO in place in order to be able to do this.
Okay. How can we measure if strategy is successful?
How can I measure if strategy is successful? So that's a big question. I think it goes back to the strategy. Ultimately, it goes back to what your organization is trying to achieve. And there should be some ways in measurements in place for your organization to be able to measure the effectiveness of their strategy. The strategy is at that executive level. So I think what you're trying to do at this level is really think about how aligned are you into that strategy. And if there's not a clear strategy, to help executives go back and really think through what that strategy should be, but also think about what the clear priorities are and make sure that the team are working on the right work that's going to really result in something that's going to yield results for the organization. So you're not measuring strategy itself here, you're really just trying to align the work that you're doing to the organization strategy. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, so one more question I want to ask you, that how we can incorporate these maturity models in different kind of industries like construction, like healthcare. I mean, how can we incorporate these kind of models?
Yeah, so so I look at these as a core set of capabilities to manage projects and lead teams. I think in each industry, there then becomes an additional set of business core capabilities that become important that I really haven't dived into here, right? So I think you would take these core capabilities and then think about how do you apply it to the work that you're doing, and then think about, well, what else for your organization? If you're in the construction industry, what else is really important? What other core capabilities should be included? So in construction, for instance, I would think about safety is probably a pretty big topic. The quality of what you're trying to do comes in many different cases, but safety is also a big topic. So you might want to develop some core capabilities around those areas as well. And in healthcare, I mean, again, I think this model works in many business settings, and that could be nonprofit, healthcare, corporation settings, business settings, as well as projects that are implementing technology, projects that are implementing process improvements. So I think it works in those settings pretty well. But again, each organization is going to have its own nuance of other things that they should start looking at as part of those core capabilities. And that goes back to the people and competencies piece under leadership, is really thinking about what that is.
Okay, good one. One more thing from my side is how we can control the scope creep. I mean, the creeping of the scope, it goes beyond the project. So how are we going to control the scope?
Yeah, that's a really important one. I think that is very challenging for a lot of people, and it goes back to the competing priorities, and it also goes back to not being able to say no because you can't quantify the work that the teams are doing right now. So if I go into an organization and I don't know what they're doing, it's very hard to have a conversation with an executive saying, I'm sorry, the team can't do that right now because they're busy. Right? That's not going to go very well. But if you can show them like a portfolio dashboard and say, here's all of the work the team's doing right now, how does this work align with that new priority or that new change? What does that piece look like? And then you can have a much more robust conversation around whether the change that's been requested is valid, and you really need to try to figure out how you're going to do it. And you can de-scope something else, or you can make an intentional decision about increasing the budget or increasing the timeline, or that it's something that can wait. And what's missing in a lot of organizations right now is the ability to have that conversation rooted in fact, rooted in the facts of here's what we're trying to do, here's the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And at the project level, just to bring it down a little bit, I also see that sometimes in project teams, we skip over really identifying what the true needs are and what the true outcomes need to be. And if you haven't defined those, then it becomes very difficult to hold the scope. If you know very clearly that the purpose of what we're doing is to achieve this one thing, then it becomes very easy to have a scope conversation when people bring up new changes, because you bring it back to, well, how does that drive this one result or this one outcome that we're trying to achieve? Is it getting us there, or is it something that's just supplementary to that? And you can make much easier scope decisions when you've really spent the time up front to be really clear about the outcomes and what's truly needed as part of the project. That's a big topic. We could spend a whole hour on it.
Yeah. So one more. Often organization changes their strategy. Which will be the best approach to manage projects, program, and portfolio?
So I think in organizations there needs to be ongoing conversations around the strategy and what the organization is trying to achieve and the work that's happening across the teams. And that's that governance and oversight category that I talked to earlier. So, often organizations they produce their strategy once a year, maybe they revisit it every 6 months. I really think there should be more conversations maybe on a quarterly basis where you're really going back and saying, okay, here's what our strategy is for this next quarter. Here's how it fits into our overall strategy, and how does the work we're doing line up with that. But again, trying to be moving forward with objectives and moving forward with the work versus really changing up the work and shifting priorities. You're trying to create alignment. Yes, if there's something that you're working on that's truly not aligned anymore, you might have to stop that work, but it's being intentional about those decisions and having the sponsor and the stakeholders and the teams around the same table having those conversations together.
Okay, so we are running out of time now.
Yeah, I see one other question that came in on Menti about the slides. So I did put the link to the slides and the worksheet in the chat. So hopefully people have been able to see that. And the link for the webinar, the implementation webinars in the chat, and a couple of other links as well. So hopefully that has come through. And I would love, before we close, if we could just get some feedback on this presentation. You know, was this helpful for folks? How do you feel walking away from here today? Have you, were you ready to take some action? Did you learn something new? Or was this sort of more of what you already know?
Yeah, so one more question from my side is, what is the main difference between a project manager and an organization leader? And what could be the roadmap for becoming an organization leader from a project manager or a higher hierarchy?
Yeah, so that's a tough question to answer generically, but it goes back to that under the leadership core capability, the people and competencies category. So really trying to define within the context of your organization, what's the expectations for someone in a project leader role, and then what's the expectations for being able to grow out of that role and take on, maybe a role with greater impact and more authority within the organization. And so that's really going to be tailored and custom for each organization. But I would think if that's something you're interested in, you should really try to define what success looks like for you right now in your role, and then even speak to your manager and say, hey, I would really like to have a conversation about making sure we're in alignment with my role right now and what's expected of me, and then what are the things I need to be able to do to grow as a leader and to show up differently as a leader so that I could really get to the next role or that next step in the ladder for my career. And, I've included in the links I put out in the chat is a link to a new leadership community. It's free. It's a free resource that I've launched just late last year. That really, I talk a lot about this. I talk about individual accountability and being able to take responsibility for your own leadership journey. And I have lots of blogs and lots of resources on this topic in that leadership community. So I put that link in if anybody's interested in joining. We certainly connect and talk more about that there.
Yeah, thank you.
This is great. Yeah, so I can close my presentation. I got lots of feedback here from people. So thank you all for participating. Hopefully you enjoyed the Menti experience. Let me stop sharing and I'll pass the baton back to you, Kassan. Great to be here with you all today. I'm seeing someone asking for the presentation, so I'll just share those again in the chat. Okay, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Anne, for a wonderful time. And thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar. The PDF will be automatically emailed to your email addresses. And regarding the video that will be available on PMI YouTube channel, and the resources Anne will be sharing with us. Yeah, Anne?
Sorry, I went on mute. So yes, so we can certainly share them via, I don't have everybody's email, but we can send them out via email to make sure everybody gets them. They are in the deck, and I also just put them in the chat box. So if everybody's able to go to the chat box, there's, I think, 4 different links in there. I've included the links for the presentation on the workbook, for the free implementation webinar, and for the leadership community, and to connect with me on LinkedIn. So.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anne. So hopefully we'll see you again soon, and hopefully we'll be having one more presentation from your side. Yeah?
Yeah, well, for anyone who wants to join next week, we'll see you then, and I'm looking forward to that as well. So thanks everybody for being such a great interactive audience today. I really love seeing everybody's feedback.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Bye.
Thanks, and bye.